You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. The idea of climate change and protecting our environment are things that have been in the news and certainly at front of mind for most people in recent years. And certainly we're seeing the increased rainfall out in BC and the landslides and all the difficulties of flooding that they have out there, and all of it related to climate change. A lot of people are asking themselves, so what can be done about that? And how do we go about approaching that problem? And who is it there to solve that? Well, farmers are in a unique position to be able to help solve that. They have the access to natural solutions in the crops that they grow and the way that they go about doing their business. We're talking today with Bryan Gilvesy from ALUS, and we're going to be talking about that very problem, about what do we do about climate change. Bryan, welcome to the Back 40.
Happy to be here.
So, Bryan, do you want to tell us just exactly what is ALUS?
ALUS is a charitable organization that is the umbrella for 33 groups that now coalesce under our banner. The original idea was drafted in a document we sort of lovingly call Alternative Land Use Services, a Farmer's Conservation Plan. Now, there's a lot in that statement, but essentially the title was to indicate to farmers that you could use your land in an alternate way and produce something more from your land, a service, in particular what we call ecosystem services, things that benefit society. And it was entitled also a Farmer's Conservation Plan because it was done from the perspective of farm leaders on the ground that sort of set up terms of how farmers could be involved in providing environmental solutions in the years to come as part and parcel of what their farms do. So we began approximately in 2006. I was the third participant farmer in the program. But what we essentially do is enable farmers and ranchers to put their hands in the dirt and create solutions from nature that provide benefits, ecosystem benefits that help us with our most pressing environmental problems. Again, farmers have land, they have skills, and they have a lot of energy that can be devoted to solving a different problem than they solved before. We simply are trying to employ them in creating a marketplace and market indicators that tell them that these are things that they can also produce on their land. The ecosystem services can range from water filtration to flood management to carbon sequestration to propagating on at-risk species and providing wildlife habitat would be a good example of some of the ecosystem services that farmers produce under our banner.
I think a lot of farmers are very interested in that type of thing, and certainly they would be very interested in protecting the environment in any way they can. But oftentimes they feel that some of the things that you go about doing get in the way of being profitable, and nobody operates without profit. But this is a little different take on this, because we're not talking about somebody doing this and not getting paid for it. We're talking about people protecting the environment and getting paid for it too.
Exactly correct. So ALUS sort of has two faces. With the one face, we are turned to the agricultural community across Canada to deliver the programming, so acres of ecosystem services. On the other hand, we face the market because we believe in the marketplace and we believe in value. And if we are indeed providing that kind of value at the farm gate, we believe that there's a marketplace that we can more formalize that value in the traditional sense, in dollars and cents that get paid to farmers for production of ecosystem services. It's a bit of a top to bottom approach, but we think market forces help provide revenue streams for this kind of work. We tend on the farm to think about any environmental work as detrimental to our profits. But at ALUS, we see the world a little bit differently. We see that we can produce these ecosystem services not at the exclusion of our cropping systems, but in addition to. Hopefully, our farmers also experience some benefits from nature that accrue to their cropping systems or their soil health along the way as well. But first and foremost, we see that we're creating benefits that accrue to society or other groups that have an interest in more ecosystem services.
It's supposed to be a win-win. You're supposed to not only help the environment, but you're supposed to be more profitable at the end of the day as well.
Let's not forget that this is the world's most pressing environmental problem. Climate change is, without a doubt, we read it every day, the world's most pressing problem. I take a pretty simple approach to that if it's a problem and we've got the wherewithal to provide solutions, the way we solve problems is the old-fashioned way. We pay people to solve problems. And I think that's where we're positioning farmers, is to be part of the solution. In other words, the farm becomes more of a multifunctional place that we produce food and fiber and ecosystem services all at the same time. It's just a little bit of a nuanced approach to what a farm does, but I think it's a healthy one. It certainly has helped me in my perspective on my farm.
So who is paying for these ecosystem services then? Who's the person that's the client that's buying them?
In Canada, we tend to look to governments to pay for these kinds of programs for farmers. At ALUS, we've taken a different perspective on this, and that is we believe there are several market types that would be willing to pay for the provisioning of ecosystem services that farmers can provide solutions to. Governments, of course, are one. Governments are in the business of obtaining ecosystem services on behalf of Canadians. If you think about a simple thing like they run habitat programming or species at risk programming, this is for the benefit of Canadians. But there are other groups that also come to the table. And you can think of what I call special interest non-government organizations. These are organizations, let's say maybe a duck hunters group. A duck hunters group has an interest in more wetlands or wetland protection because they love ducks. We can deliver on that sort of a thing for a special interest group in the same way as we would for any other marketplace. Municipalities have a great interest in the work that we do because we can often provide water filtration services, flood management, cost control for municipalities that are rural in nature, that depend on the countryside to help provide some of the ecosystem services. Naturally, we think the big player here are going to be corporate in nature, and corporations are seeing many drivers that will change the way they operate. And one of the ways they will be choosing to operate increasingly is to make sure that they're addressing all their landscape impacts. We can help at ALUS with those impacts.
So what type of a company, you say that companies are interested in, why would a company get involved in this and start paying for eco services that we can't necessarily see a direct connection there?
There are several drivers, but companies these days are now increasingly reporting on ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues and their impacts on those sorts of things. The reason they're reporting that is if they don't address their impacts, they feel that they could lose their social license, their license to operate freely in a country like ours. So it's very important for them to address their impacts on the landscape from the investor perspective and for the long-term sustainability of the company. The second driver is a bit of a more nuanced one, but these days, we believe corporations are addressing some of these impacts because millennials that are joining the workforce now are very cognizant about issues like this. They care about issues like this. And if you're a big company and you want to survive for the long term, you've got to be able to attract the best talent. We believe that this is an important driver as well. And lastly, I can't think of any Canadian corporation that doesn't want to be a good corporate citizen and work with the context of the communities in which they operate.
This is marketplace forces driving what you're doing. You're talking about attracting talent. You're talking about your social license. You're talking about people wanting to buy the product as well as work for the company. And they're looking at what more than just what they produce, but what they are doing to protect the environment as well.
Right. We sort of see the gathering of market forces on the horizon. We know very well because today our producers across the country have accrued about 150 square kilometers of project sites that are producing ecosystem services that are managed and maintained by farmers and done within their community context. It's getting to be a significant piece of work. In other words, we've got enough momentum now to understand that farmers are willing to deliver on the conditions that we have established. In other words, we want to pay them the value of the ecosystem services, the full suite of ecosystem services that they produce. And we have positioned ourselves to understand that this market energy will only grow, and then we can be a conduit between that marketplace and farmers in a way that recognizes that there's value produced at the farm gate, and we should try and get as much money to the farm gate as possible.
Certainly, the increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the worry about greenhouse gases and farmers being in a position to be able to sequester that carbon has been very much in the news in the last little while, that we need to do something about that. Why isn't just sequestering the carbon enough? Why is that just a part of the answer?
One of the things that when you talk about how you're relating to a marketplace or to a driver like climate change, you have to understand what your value proposition is. And the value proposition of a farmer taking climate action is this, that if we take climate action, then we produce these co-benefits that are significantly important to Canadians and their quality of life. In other words, we can do that and create more wildlife habitat. Canadians care about wildlife and they care about habitat. We can help manage flood and control water filtration costs for our downstream communities. In sequestering the carbon, we can build soil and build a food shed that will be much more resilient and carry us into the future quite capably. So it's because there's a complex suite or bundle of benefits that emerge. Climate change is a much more complex issue, and farmers are providing a broad suite of benefits to address all the impacts of climate change.
When I was at school, we were always taught that more carbon in the soil means that there's more water holding capacity, there's more nutrient holding capacity, and all of that is the same thing that you're talking about there. Is we're protecting the water. We want to protect the water. We want to protect the wildlife. We want to protect other species that are at risk. And if we just say, well, we build the soil, that's great, but there's a lot more to it than that.
I mean, I've been at this for 16 years now, and I can't tell you how, at the end of the day, how much of the work that we do revolves around water. Water speaks to so many of our issues in terms of our agricultural resilience. Being able to suck up rainfall events in our soils helps us manage floods and helps us hang on to the moisture that we get in tough times like occurred this year in the prairies. There's so many things that emanate out of the water issues in a productive way for us by participating in ALUS. We're helping ourselves to be more resilient and to adapt our farms to a climate that's very unforgiving, or it seems that way the last couple of years, that's for sure.
Farming has always been at the mercy of the weather and at the mercy of that, mostly water, either too much or too little. And the soils, as you say, are much more able to manage that water if you've got more carbon in them and you're doing a better job of managing that water as you come. That's a different way of looking at it, though, than a lot of people think about when they think about climate change and carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases.
It is. I had the privilege of coming to this program as a farmer when it was just a concept. And one of the things that is underestimated in our community, and I'm a great example of it, I didn't know of these issues. I don't know what happened to our memory of these sort of nature-based solutions that maybe my grandfather, when he farmed, had a little bit more innately in his system. But ALUS provided the support and the assistance that I began to understand again how some of these systems can work, how nature-based solutions can work and help us farm. And again, put us in a different marketplace that we never thought we'd be in at the same time.
So what attracted you to the program? You said you've been in this for 16 years and you were the third participant in the program there. What got you involved?
I had one of those moments where, like a lot of farmers across Canada, I consider myself a very good steward of the land. But one thing happened to me that made me think differently about where our role is, and that is I was trying to do something really simple. I was trying to cross my cattle across the stream in a productive way to keep the cattle from spoiling the stream as they crossed. And I went looking at the prevailing programs of the day. And the programs only at that time would offer me assistance if I had already ruined the stream, if the cattle were already down there. And from a risk management perspective, I could get money to get them out and fence it off. But there was no money at the time to do the right thing the first time. And that got my wheels turning. It's almost simultaneously that I approached my stewardship council chair and he introduced me to this ALUS concept. Now, what ALUS turned on in me was simply this, that if we're proactive this way, then we are also productive. Look, the farms and ranch of Canada, we are, if not anything, we are productive people. So the notion came to me that we could be producing ecosystem services and not just trying to protect the environment. That's a whole different nuance to it. Farmers are producers. We produce things. Why aren't these things that we can produce emanate from our farm and build upon our natural stewardship ethic? It just fit. I mean, maybe I was stubborn when I came to it, but it just fit. Environmentalism is often seen as the purvey of people in the cities, but you know what? We are the original environmentalists here on the farm. And I think that's kind of a brand thing that I liked. I enjoy that we are massive contributors to the wellness of our country.
From an urban perspective, there's only so much you can do. You only own a little piece of land there. And the idea that companies would pay for some of these services there, when the companies come to ALUS with the opportunities there, do they have something specific in mind, or do they look for you for guidance? Do they come and say, hey, we want to be more socially responsible, we want to be more environmentally responsible? How do we do that?
I think the company that comes in our door and looks to sponsor our project sites typically have not been satisfied by single dimensional approaches to their environmental impacts. In other words, we know maybe the carbon's the first driver, but we also impact water, and we also want to impact positively the communities that our factories are in, that our plants are in, where our people live, work, and play. And they're looking for a way to impact more than just carbon as an expression of who they are as a company. The first driver is usually either climate change or water issues, but community always crops up. Getting leverage for wildlife and biodiversity always crops up. You know, it just becomes part of the package. So if you look at them and they're in the marketplace to obtain something that is helpful to their image, we provide a pretty compelling argument, the farmers of Canada.
Yeah, it's the one group of people that are actually in the business of protecting the water and bringing carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the soil.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @trilliummutual.
So how does ALUS relate to this? How do they get involved in this, and how do you manage these projects through what you're doing?
So Mike, every time that ALUS grows in a new community, it's important to recognize that the first thing that we insist happens is that a partnership advisory committee is formed to govern the programming within that community. Now, a partnership advisory committee must be made up of at least 50% farmers or ranchers. And then we also love to see other interested community members around the table, like maybe some conservation groups, maybe the mayor, maybe some clerks. So at the end of the day, we have the farmers at its core, but a really good cross-section of that community. That's a group that's entrusted with governing that program at a local level, and makes us truly grassroots. We give them simple guidance. Of course, we have all the programmatic supports in the world, but we give them simple guidance around how they make decisions.
So how do you go about doing that?
What we do is we ask them to ascribe to a three-way decision tree. You might have heard of groups, I think it's Kiwanis that has a four-way decision tree, but we ask them to simply make their decision-making on three things. So number one, does the activity that they're contemplating adhere to the ALUS principles? We have 8 principles that we ascribe to. Those principles are laid out in our Farmers Conservation Plan and have been the case from the beginning of time. Secondly, we always insist that there must be additional ecosystem services produced than were there before. So in other words, we are not in the business of protecting nature, rather we are in the business of producing more. And lastly, they have to be a little bit careful that if money's directed their way, that they have to faithfully discharge the intent of that money. And that's pretty simple. If a duck hunting group is expressing their money through your PAC to have more wetlands, then they probably shouldn't use that money to do grassland or grassland restoration. So it's a pretty simple thing, but it takes some time for the PAC to understand our principles. that our role is the production role, not the protection role. That's an important niche for us to identify in the world of conservation. Just what every conservation group protects things, we make more.
Yeah, you're more like in a restoration of those natural habitats that have been lost.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you measure as a farmer? How do you measure when you've been successful? I know that's one of the things that farmers have said. Well, I know that I have carbon in my soil, and I know that I grow crops that put carbon in the soil, but I can't really measure what I'm doing. How do you go about doing that?
Well, your eye helps you measure first. Universally, almost all our producers see things on their landscape that they maybe didn't see before, whether it's they see more birds or they see more worms in the soil or things like that. But you do see visual evidence of that. Now at ALUS, we run some scientific research in the background that helps provide confirmation of that. And we disseminate that information as quickly as we can to our farm participants. Almost universally, every ALUS farmer experiences a higher soil organic matter. That's something I think we all mind very clearly. But would you be surprised if there's research from the University of Guelph that says that there's almost immediately to some of our grassland restoration sites here in Southern Ontario, we see a 300% increase in beneficial insects on our farms. Like this is something that when you walk out there and you hear the buzzing of native bees, you get it, but it's sure nice to have that science behind it and help you understand that what you're seeing is real.
Restoring that natural habitat to bring that back. As farmers, many of the insects that we don't want there, we're good at getting rid of them, but we're not good at protecting the ones that are beneficial. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't have the habitat for a lot of this stuff anymore.
It's true, but I don't want to say that our knowledge is forgotten. Before Canada was colonized, there was no honeybees here. Even today, we have 850 species of native bees and other pollinator insects, but none of them produce honey. The honeybee is a commercial animal that we've harnessed, like cattle, for instance, to help pollinate our crops. Well, the days of yore, we didn't need honeybees because we kept enough native pollinators on our landscape. And those native pollinators, they live and work here. They're natural to our environment. There's lots of data suggesting that if we set aside between 4 and 7% of our lands, if you're doing pollination-dependent crops, for native pollinators, creating habitat, especially if we create it through ALUS, there's greater yields and better fruit set. I'm enjoying the fact that we can bring some attention to that sort of data that can help us understand our relationship to nature on the farm, that it can be a beneficial one.
The whole concept is more than just about protecting the environment and more just about keeping the crops safe and doing a better job. It's also about making more profit out of that too. And that doesn't always mean more production off the farm, but as you say, those alternate income sources. At ALUS, you're involved in something called the New Acre Project. What's that all about?
We wanted to create a way for corporations to interact with ALUS and connect more directly to the ecosystem services that our farm participants are producing, and to give them credit for the work that they've sponsored in a way that's in cooperation with our communities and our farmers. The New Acre Project then connects some of our acre outcomes to the funding supplied by corporations in a really, really productive way. A great example of a funding platform that has come through the New Acre portal is the Grazing Forward program that we've just launched this last spring that's funded by Cargill and A&W. It's essentially sponsoring Grazing Forward, which is an enhanced grazing opportunity for Canadian ranchers within our system. That allows them to use the beef supply chain that feeds their companies to also solve their problems. And isn't that a neat way of doing business?
Yeah, it is. We talk about it from everybody needs a niche market or the niche markets pay more. This is a real example of that. This is a real example of more than just producing beef cattle, but also producing it in a certain way and getting paid for it as well.
So one of the keys then to delivering on these sorts of programs, when we take action under Grazing Forward or any of our other programmatic choices, there are more ecosystem services produced after our treatment than before. In other words, being productive of ecosystem services that are additional to the ones that exist on the farm is core to the value that we're producing. So this is not in any way, shape, or form a production assistance program. This is producing something else that is of value and that fits the corporation's eye.
What's the demand like for this? Do you have companies that are extremely interested in this? Do you have farmers that are extremely interested in this? How does that match up? Or do you have more of one than the other?
On the farmer side, I believe we've got enough momentum that I think we see a steady stream of communities joining our program. We do deliver it on a community by community basis where the community governs the program. We have 33 community partnerships today, and we continue that growth as communities approach us to bring the program to their area. At the same time, in the communities that we are in now, there is farmer demand to continue enrolling in the program and growing the projects that they have in the ground at the same time. We crossed a bit of a threshold, I believe, when we were around 27 or 28 communities where we became a thing, where we became acceptable, and our approach was the choice for farmers across Canada. So the growth will continue on the ground. On the market side has been a little bit more tricky. We see a wave of energy that's forming on the horizon. But so far today, we see some companies that are early adopters and have come to our program: RBC, Danone, Cargill, A&W, Bruce Power, TD Bank.
It's an interesting list of companies that are interested there. You've got some that you have a direct connection through to agriculture in the idea of what they produce as products. And then you've got other ones that may provide services to farmers, but don't really produce anything from an agricultural standpoint. It's an interesting group of companies that are interested and involved in this.
I think that speaks to something that's powerful, and that is we're delivering rural communities, solving environmental problems for all Canadians and indeed the globe. This is powerful. I mean, I believe that corporations want to be part of something like this, whether it's directly impacting their supply chain or whether they just think it's a good idea to invest in this stuff. I don't think the typical company that walks in our door can be described. It's anybody that captures the power of what this program can produce.
So what's the biggest barrier, do you think, to people getting, companies and farmers getting involved in this?
There's only so fast we can grow, and we grow as quickly as we possibly can with the funds that we can raise. Our team is relatively small today at 18 people. And so I would say sometimes our capacity is the biggest barrier. I believe that the Farmers Conservation Plan concept is fairly well refined, giving communities the power to make decisions of these sorts of things and really running a grassroots program. That's taken a long time to curate or develop, but I think we've gotten that right. I think the limitations are within us, how much support we can get to grow and attract other corporate partners or other government partners that want to come and invest. We go as fast as we can. We are talking to partners that want to see us scale much more aggressively, and we will continue to grow as fast as we possibly can.
A little bit about resources.
The answer to all your questions is money, if you've ever heard that saying before.
It certainly does help things go a little bit easier, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
This is not just Ontario project. This is all across Canada, right?
Not yet. We are in 6 provinces, but we do intend to be across Canada. We don't think we'll ever have much of a presence in Newfoundland. There isn't a tremendous amount of agriculture there, or the territories, of course. But we're in 6 provinces right now. We're proud to have found the resources to become bilingual as an organization, so everything gets translated. But we continue to grow and seek opportunities in every province.
So I'm going to ask you to gaze into the crystal ball a little bit there and tell me, where do you think you'll be in 5 years, and where do you think you'll be in 10 years? What's in the future for you?
I believe this concept and the lead up work that my team has done, if you look into the horizon, you see a gathering storm coming. I believe our organization is really well prepared to accept the rain and deliver on those promises that we make and engage more and more farmers. Our impacts will always continue to grow. As I said earlier, we're at 150 square kilometers of impacts today. That's pretty significant. But on the other hand, sometimes I think that's just a really good start. I just believe that we will become the mechanism of choice to resolve complex environmental problems across Canada, with farmers and ranchers as key solution providers.
Yeah, we're looking at people, as you say, they've got their hands in the dirt. They're in a unique position to be able to provide these solutions where a lot of others are not able to do that because they simply don't have that connection to the land. If somebody wants to find out more about ALUS and what you do and how they can get involved, how do they do that?
Well, we have a pretty good website now called at alus.ca, and it's ALUS. The acronym stands for Alternative Land Use Services, but that's a pretty good place to start. And of course, we encourage any farmer-led community group across the country to come forward to join our program as we head down the road.
This is an issue that's not going away. That's an issue that's only going to become more and more pertinent to us. And hopefully we can see more and more solutions. And certainly you said they're doubling every 3 years. That certainly has the potential to have a tremendous size impact, bigger than what you do now. Bryan, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us on the Back 40 today.
Okay, then thank you, Mike, for having me. Hopefully we'll chat again down the road.
Join us next time when our guests will be Dr. Kate Dewey and Dr. Jeff Wichtal from the Ontario Veterinary College, and we'll be talking about One Health and multidisciplinary approach to solving disease problems. That's next time on the Back 40. You've been listening to the Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to the Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Bryan. Until next time, take care and stay safe.